The door swung open, revealing not a suite, but a single room dominated by a queen bed that looked suspiciously narrow. The scent of raw pine and altitude-thin air hit me instantly, sharp and cold, cutting through the warmth of the hallway. Behind me, a gear bag thudded heavily against the floorboards. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Sophia. Her presence always carried a specific static charge, like the air before a storm. "You have got to be kidding me," she said, her voice dry. 2 weeks of mandatory Olympic training, 1 cabin, and the only person on Earth I was desperate to beat. The tension wasn't just competitive anymore. It was suffocatingly physical. This facility was supposed to be the pinnacle of high-performance isolation. Perched 3,000 meters up in the Rockies, the air was thin enough to make your lungs burn just standing still. It was designed to break you down so you could rebuild stronger, faster. But the breakdown wasn't supposed to start at the check-in desk. The camp director, a nervous man in a fleece vest, had tapped his keyboard with increasing desperation before admitting the truth. A booking error. A double entry in a system that didn't allow for overrides. Every other bunk was filled with rowers and track stars, leaving us with the overflow cabin. I had looked at Coach, expecting him to fix it. He just shrugged, checking his stopwatch like our heart rates were already wasting his time. "Consider it a cohesion exercise," he'd said, not looking up from his clipboard. "You two need to stop playing like enemies if you want that doubles medal. Figure it out." Then he walked off toward the courts, leaving us standing in the gravel driveway with our massive duffels and a single brass key. Sophia. For 10 years, she's been the wall I hit balls against, the benchmark I measure my split steps by. On the tour, we nod. We shake hands at the net with grips firm enough to bruise, but we don't share space. We certainly don't share oxygen in a 12 by 12 timber box. Standing there, staring at the cabin, I felt the familiar tighten in my gut. That mix of adrenaline and annoyance that only she triggers. She isn't just a rival. She is the variable I can never quite solve. Her game is all angles and ice, while I play with power and grit. We are oil and water forced into a pressure cooker. We dragged our bags inside. The reality of the private accommodation was even more intimate than the doorway suggested. The walls were unvarnished log, closing in tight. There was a small kitchenette with a humming mini fridge, a stone fireplace that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 90s, and that bed. One bed. The quilt was a faded patchwork, innocent in any other context, but here it looked like a battlefield. The bathroom door was a sliding barn style that didn't look like it latched completely. I could already imagine the humidity, the sound of the shower, the unavoidable proximity of our toothbrushes on the tiny porcelain sink. I dropped my bag near the window, claiming the side with the view of the tree line. Sophia stood in the center of the room, hands on her hips, scanning the space like she was dissecting an opponent's serve. "I take the left side," she stated, not asking. "And if you snore, Sam, I'm smothering you with a pillow." It was a joke, but her eyes didn't crinkle. I could have walked away. I could have called my agent, demanded a hotel in the nearest town an hour away, and commuted. But that would look like weakness. That would look like she got to me. And in this game, at this level, you never let them see you sweat before the warm-up even starts. The silence of the mountain pressed against the glass, heavy and absolute. I unzipped my jacket, the sound loud in the small room. "I don't snore," I said, matching her flatness, "but keep your gear on your side of the line." We were staying. The altitude was already making my head spin. Or maybe it was just the realization that there was nowhere to hide from her. Unpacking in a space the size of a walk-in closet required a level of choreography we hadn't rehearsed. We moved like repelling magnets, an aggressive geometry of avoidance. If I stepped toward the dresser, Sophia pivoted to the window. If she reached for the closet, I found a sudden need to check the thermostat. It was ridiculous, this elaborate physical distance we were trying to maintain, while our gear bags spilled open and mingled on the floor. "Top drawer is mine," I said, tossing a stack of training tees into it before she could argue. "Fine," she shot back, her voice cool, not looking up from where she was aligning her shoes in a militant row by the door. "But the closet rod is split 50-50. And if your lucky towel touches my warm-up jacket, I'm burning it." "It's not lucky," I muttered, shoving the towel onto a hanger. "It's high-absorbency microfiber. Whatever helps you sleep, Sam." We marked our territories with the pettiness of siblings and the precision of engineers. My side of the nightstand held my water bottle, phone, and a chaotic pile of resistance bands. Her side was a minimalist shrine, a single book, a neatly coiled charger, and a sleep mask. It was the first time I'd seen her domestic habits up close, and it was unnerving. On the tour, Sophia's an image projected on screens or a silhouette across the net, armored in sponsorship logos and stoicism. Here she was flesh and blood, unfolding socks. She checked the heel of each one for wear before rolling it, a tiny ritual of perfectionism that explained why her footwork never faltered. It made her human. The air in the cabin shifted, thickening with a scent that wasn't pine or dust. It was her. On the court, we both smell like sweat, sunscreen, and the rubber of fresh tennis balls. But here, in the stillness, she smelled of something cooler. Eucalyptus, expensive soap, and a sharp metallic note that reminded me of ozone. It was distracting. I found myself tracking her movement, not by sight, but by that displacement of air. Every time she walked past the foot of the bed, the scent followed, a ghost trailing in her wake. It made the room feel smaller, the oxygen thinner. Then came the bathroom standoff. The sliding barn door was an aesthetic choice that offered zero acoustic privacy and even less visual security. The latch was loose, leaving a sliver of a gap. I stood in the doorway, watching her arrange her toiletries on the pedestal sink. Her toothbrush, an electric model that looked like a medical device, sat dangerously close to my drugstore manual one. The humidity from the shower she'd just run hung in the air, damp and heavy, carrying the smell of her shampoo. "You going to stare at my moisturizer all night?" she asked, catching my reflection in the mirror. She was wiping steam off the glass, her movements efficient, stripping away the fog. "Just making sure you don't use up all the hot water," I said, leaning against the frame. "We have an A600 start. I take cold showers, Sam. Unlike some people, I don't need to be coddled." She capped a bottle with a decisive click and brushed past me. Her shoulder grazed my arm, a momentary accidental friction that sent a jolt straight down my spine, sharp as a static shock. My skin burned with the memory of it. I stiffened, holding my breath, but she didn't stop, moving to her side of the room as if nothing had happened. We settled into an uneasy truce as the light faded outside, turning the window into a black mirror, reflecting our forced proximity. The banter died down, replaced by the rustle of sheets and the hum of the fridge. We were two soldiers in a foxhole waiting for the shelling to start. I lay in the dark, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. It was steady, controlled, just a few feet away. The rivalry was still there, a wall between us, but the mortar was cracking and the silence felt heavy with things we weren't saying. The court at dawn was a slab of gray concrete surrounded by silent pines. The air was so crisp it felt brittle, like it might snap if we shouted. But we didn't shout, we hit. The first ball I struck felt alien. The altitude took the drag off, and it sailed long, thudding hard against the fence. Sophia didn't speak. She just adjusted her stance, racket throat in her left hand, eyes locked on me. She fed the next ball, A flat drive right at my hip. I jammed my elbow in, barely blocking it back. That was the tone. We weren't warming up. We were establishing dominance. For 20 minutes, we traded ground strokes, and every shot was a declaration of war. I hit with heavy topspin, trying to bury her. She countered with laser-guided precision, taking the ball on the rise, robbing me of time. It was a rhythm of violence. Thwack, grunt, squeak. We were trying to break each other's rhythm, to find the crack in the armor before the match play even started. Then, Coach blew his whistle. "Enough measuring, Dix," he barked. "You're a doubles team. Get to the net." This was the nightmare. Doubles requires a psychic link, a surrender of ego. You have to move as if you are tethered by an invisible rope. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Sophia felt unnatural. My instinct was to guard against her, not with her. "Ball!" Coach shouted, feeding a lob. "Mine!" I screamed, crossing behind her. I smashed the overhead, my shoulder brushing hers as I recovered. She flinched, but didn't move away. "Switch!" she yelled on the next point, sliding across to cover my side. We spent 2 hours in that pressure cooker. The drills were designed to force synchronization. If I moved left, she had to move left. It was exhausting. I had to constantly account for her presence, mapping her location without looking. The squeak of our shoes became a singular, frantic noise. Sweat soaked through my shirt, stinging my eyes. My lungs burned from the altitude, screaming for oxygen that wasn't there. But then, it happened. We were running a defensive drill against 2 male sparring partners. One ripped a forehand down the line, a sure winner. I was caught on the wrong foot, helpless. But Sophia exploded from a standstill. She lunged, fully extended, and didn't just block the ball, she carved under it. A backhand squash shot. The ball died in the air, floating over the net with so much backspin it practically bounced backward. It was unplayable. Genius. I stood there, chest heaving, staring at her. She wiped her forehead, expression unreadable. But I knew the technical difficulty of that shot. For a second, the rivalry vanished, replaced by the pure, objective appreciation of a master at work. "Nice hands," I said. The words tasted like ash, but I meant them. She glanced at me, surprised. "You set it up," she clipped. "You pulled him wide." It wasn't a thank you. It was a tactical acknowledgement. But it was something. Coach called time. We walked back to the cabin in silence, gear bags heavy, adrenaline still hammered in my blood, though my legs felt like lead. We walked side by side, not touching, but the distance had shrunk. We had bled together. The hostility was still there, baseline deep, but walking back to that tiny room, the air felt charged with electricity. It wasn't just that we were enemies anymore. We were partners who had seen what the other was truly capable of. The temperature plummeted the moment the sun slipped behind the ridge. It wasn't a gradual cooling. It was a sudden, violent theft of heat that turned the window panes into sheets of black ice. We retreated into the cabin, not because we wanted the proximity, but because the mountain gave us no choice. The fire I built in the stone hearth was sad and smoky, struggling against the damp wood, but it was the only thing standing between us and the freezing dark. Exhaustion is a powerful solvent. It dissolves the glue that holds up your public persona. After 10 hours of drills, the energy required to maintain the Ice Queen glare or the stoic warrior posture was simply too expensive to spend. We moved around the small room in a daze, stripped down to compression gear, limbs heavy and humming with lactic acid. The silence that settled between us wasn't the sharp, weaponized silence of the afternoon. It was the heavy, thick silence of survival. We were just 2 bodies trying to repair themselves before the sun came up and the punishment started again. I sat on the edge of the bed, kneading the knot in my quad. Sophia was on the floor, stretching. The foam roller, the only one provided, sat between us like a disputed borderland. She reached for it, then hesitated, her hand hovering, glancing at me with a guarded look. "Take it," I grunted, too tired to fight for territory. "My IT band is shot, but your back looks worse." She didn't argue. She didn't offer a snarky comeback about my fitness levels or my form. She just pulled the roller under her spine and exhaled, a sound that was half groan, half sigh. It was a sound I'd never heard her make. On tour, Sophia never made noise. She didn't grunt when she hit. She didn't sigh when she sat. She was silent efficiency. Hearing that small, involuntary vocalization felt like walking in on her naked. It was an accidental intimacy that made me look away, focusing intently on the grain of the floorboards. The sharp, medicinal smell of muscle cream filled the room, stinging my eyes. She was applying it to her right shoulder, her movements stiff and careful. I watched her from the periphery of my vision, unable to help myself. Her shirt was pulled to the side, exposing the elegant slope of her neck and the sharp definition of her deltoid. There, just under the strap of her sports bra, was a network of kinesiology tape, peeling at the edges. Beneath it, the skin looked angry, inflamed. I froze. The invincible Sophia, who claimed she never needed physio, was taped up like a mummy. She caught me looking. Her hand flew up to cover the tape, her eyes narrowing instantly. The reflex was pure defense. "Don't," she warned, her voice low. "I didn't say anything," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "You're filing it away, looking for the weakness." "I'm looking at a rotator cuff that's going to blow if you don't ice it," I said, grabbing an ice pack from the mini fridge and tossing it to her. It landed on her chest with a wet thud. She stared at the pack, then at me. The suspicion in her eyes warred with the pain. Finally, the pain won. She pressed the ice to her shoulder, her head falling back against the bed frame. "Thanks," she whispered. The word hung in the air, fragile and strange. I turned off the lamp, plunging us into absolute darkness. The fire had died down to embers, casting a faint pulsing red glow on the ceiling beams. I lay on the very edge of the mattress, my back to her, clinging to my side of the demarcation line. But I could feel her. The cheap mattress transferred every shift of her weight. I could hear the rhythm of her breathing change as the ice numbed the pain and sleep took over. It wasn't the breathing of a rival anymore. It was just the sound of another human being 3 inches away, trusting me enough to close her eyes. The hostility that usually defined us had evaporated into the cold air, leaving something raw in its place. For the first time, the sound of her breathing didn't make me want to win. It just made me feel less alone in the dark. Recovery isn't a suggestion at this altitude, it's a religious rite. If you skip the ice, your inflammation will eat you alive by morning. If you skip the stretch, your tendons will snap like over-tightened violin strings. But in a cabin designed for a solitary fisherman, recovery became a contact sport. The bathroom was the only place with a tub, a clawfoot porcelain relic that looked beautiful in brochures and felt like a coffin in practice. We established a rotation. I hauled the bags of ice from the communal freezer down the gravel path, my breath pluming in the night air while Sophia prepped the water. When I kicked the bathroom door open, bag hoisted on my shoulder, she was already sitting on the edge of the tub, wrapped in a towel, staring at the water like it was a predator. "Ready to freeze?" I asked, dumping the ice. The cubes crashed into the water, a chaotic, fracturing sound that echoed off the tile. "Just pour it, Sam, before I lose my nerve." She dropped the towel. For a second, I looked away, instinctual modesty kicking in, but we were athletes. We've spent half our lives in locker rooms. I turned back as she stepped in, her breath hitching in a sharp, ragged gasp as the freezing water hit her skin. She sank down to her neck, eyes squeezing shut, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle feathering near her ear. I sat on the closed toilet lid, timer in hand. Breathe. I instructed, my voice low. If you hyperventilate, the vasoconstriction happens too fast. I know. The physiology, she hissed through gritted teeth. Her skin was turning that alarming shade of pink that precedes numb. Watching her endure it was strange. On the court, I wanted to see her break. I wanted to see her tired, frustrated, beaten. But here, watching her fight the physical shock, I felt a weird, sympathetic ache in my own chest. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with shared suffering. I knew exactly how that cold felt, like 1,000 needles finding every nerve ending. "Talk to me," she demanded suddenly, eyes still closed. "Distract me." "Your serve toss was drifting left today," I said automatically. It was the only language we both spoke fluently. "It was the wind," she shot back, voice shaking slightly. "Gusts coming off the ridge." "It wasn't the wind. You're dropping your shoulder." 2 minutes, she groaned, ignoring the critique but clearly grateful for the friction. "Tell me when." When the timer beeped, she surged out of the water, shivering so violently, the water sloshed over the rim. I handed her the warm towel from the radiator and our fingers brushed, hers ice cold, mine burning hot. The contrast was jarring. Later, on the rug in front of the fire, the dynamic shifted from endurance to manipulation. We needed to stretch, and at this level, static stretching doesn't cut it. We needed PNF, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. It requires a partner to push the limb to its limit, hold the resistance, and then push further. It requires absolute trust and significant force. "Hamstrings," she commanded, lying on her back. "Don't go easy." I knelt beside her, lifting her right leg. I rested her ankle against my shoulder, my hands locking just above her knee to keep the leg straight. "Push against me," I said. 3, 2, 1, go. She drove her heel down into my shoulder, engaging the muscle. I braced my core, leaning into her force, effectively wrestling her leg. The physical exertion was immense. I could feel the power she generated, the sheer, coiled strength that allowed her to explode across the court. After 10 seconds, she relaxed. "Okay, push," she breathed. I leaned forward, driving her leg further back toward her chest, stretching the muscle while it was relaxed. My hands were on her skin. No barrier, just my palms against the smooth, strong muscle of her thigh. The heat radiating from her was intense, a furnace stoked by the ice bath's rebound effect. Further, she challenged, staring up at me. Her face was flushed, hair damp and drying in wild waves against the rug. "I don't want to tear it, Sophia. I'm not made of glass. Push." I applied more pressure. My face was inches from her knee. Her other leg was tangled near mine. The position was compromising, deeply physical, and entirely professional. Yet, the air between us grew heavy. Every time I adjusted my grip, my thumb grazed the sensitive skin of her inner thigh, and I felt her breath hitch. Not from pain, but from the sudden electric awareness of the contact. "You're tight," I murmured, the words slipping out with a double meaning I hadn't intended. "Focus on the stretch, Sam," she whispered, but her eyes didn't leave mine. "Don't enjoy my pain too much." "Who says I'm enjoying it?" I countered, leaning in until I felt the resistance point, that hard stop where the muscle refuses to yield. "Your hands are shaking," she noted, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "That's muscle fatigue," I lied. It wasn't. It was the adrenaline of proximity. We moved through the routine, quads, glutes, calves. By the time we switched and she was pinning my arm behind my back to open up my chest, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. Her chest pressed against my shoulder blade as she leveraged my arm back. I could feel her heartbeat against my spine. It wasn't just that we were touching, it was that our bodies seemed to recognize each other. I knew the exact angle of her resistance. She knew the precise moment my breath caught before I tapped out. Years of watching each other from across the net had mapped us to one another, but touching filled in the topography. It was terrifying. It meant she wasn't just an opponent anymore. She was a physical reality, heavy and warm and undeniably compatible with my own mechanics. The only surface stable enough for the laptop was the bed. The small cafe table was covered in drying gear, and the floor was too hard for the hour of footage Coach had uploaded to the cloud. So we were propped up against the rough pine headboard, the computer balanced precariously on our thighs. The screen was the only light source, bathing our faces in a spectral blue glow that made the cabin feel like a submarine, pressurized and deep underwater. To see the details of the Czech team's service motion, we had to sit hip to hip, legs extended, the quilt pulled up over our feet. "Go back," Sophia commanded, her voice low. I tapped the left arrow key. On screen, the Czech server tossed the ball against a pixelated sky. "Stop." "There." She pointed, her finger tracing the line of the opponent's shoulder. She drops her tossing arm early when she's going down the tee. It opens her chest too soon. I squinted, recognizing the pattern immediately, which means the disguise on the slice is fake. She's signaling the flat serve. "Exactly," Sophia nodded, shifting slightly. The movement pressed her shoulder firmer against mine, a solid, warm weight. "So, you don't need to guard the alley. You can cheat middle." "And if I cheat middle," I continued, the logic flowing effortlessly between us, "I can take the return on the rise and drive it cross court. That forces the net player to poach. And I'll be waiting for the poach," she finished, a savage satisfaction in her tone. "I'll take their heads off." We stared at each other for a beat, the paused frame of the match freezing the room. It was a terrifying synergy. For years, I had guarded my tactical mind like a state secret, paranoid that she would decode my thinking and use it to dismantle me. Now, realizing that our tennis IQs were perfectly compatible pieces of the same puzzle was disorienting. It was an intellectual intimacy that felt more dangerous than the physical one. We weren't just sharing a room, we were sharing a brain. "You know," she said quietly, her gaze dropping to the keyboard, where my hand rested near the trackpad. "I always hated playing you on clay. You play with so much violence. It's messy." "Messy wins points," I defended, though my heart rate kicked up. "I didn't say it was bad," she corrected, looking up through her lashes. The blue light caught the flecks of gold in her eyes, stripping away the usual icy distance. I said, "I hated it, because I respected it. You have a grit I can't coach. It's formidable." The word hung in the air, heavier than the altitude. Formidable. Coming from Sophia, who treated compliments like currency she couldn't afford to spend, it was devastating. I looked at her lips, then quickly back to the screen, but the footage of the checks was just noise. Now, my focus had shattered. I was hyper-aware of the heat radiating from her leg along the length of mine, the way her breathing had synced with mine without us trying. The laptop hummed, warm on our laps, but it was nothing compared to the temperature rising under my skin. I went to hit play to break the tension with the safety of work, but my hand brushed hers. She didn't pull away. Her pinky finger hooked slightly, grazing the side of my hand, a micro gesture that felt louder than a scream. "Sam," she started, her voice dropping an octave, losing its analytical edge. Before I could answer, the cabin shook. A crack of thunder, immediate and deafening, exploded directly overhead, followed instantly by the sound of rain hitting the roof like gravel. The power strip by the TV sparked once, and the laptop screen flickered and died. We were plunged into total suffocating darkness, the storm outside mirroring the sudden chaotic pressure inside my chest. The thunder didn't roll. It detonated. The sound was a sonic boom that vibrated through the mattress and deep into the marrow of my bones, followed instantly by a strobe light flash of lightning that bleached the cabin bone white. For a split second, Sophia's face was frozen in a mask of stark, illuminated surprise. Then the darkness swallowed us whole. It wasn't the polite, ambient darkness of a dimmed bedroom. It was the heavy, suffocating black of a cave, absolute and disorienting. The laptop screen died, the hum of the mini fridge cut out, and the only sound left was the rain hammering the roof like 1,000 frantic hands trying to claw their way in. "Sam?" Sophia's voice came out of the void, stripped of its usual armor. It sounded small, unmoored. "I'm here," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. I fumbled blindly for the emergency lantern on the nightstand, my hand knocking over a water bottle in the process. The plastic clatter sounded obscenely loud in the sudden quiet. When my fingers finally found the switch, the beam that cut through the room didn't comfort me. It just narrowed the universe down to the two of us. I set the lantern on the floor between the beds, casting long, distorted shadows that danced up the log walls. The amber light caught Sophia's face, highlighting the hollow of her throat and the wideness of her eyes. She wasn't looking at the window. She was looking at me. The storm outside was throwing itself against the glass, wind shrieking through the eaves, but the pressure inside the room was rising faster. The temperature had dropped with the power, but I was burning up. "We're stuck," she murmured, pulling her knees to her chest. It wasn't a complaint. It was an observation of the sudden, terrifying intimacy of our situation. The storm had erased the world, leaving only this timber box and the history we'd packed into it. "The generator won't kick in for the outbuildings," I said, the practical words feeling useless, like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. "Just the main lodge." "I don't care about the generator," she said, her gaze drifting to the fire, which was now just a bed of glowing coals. "I care that I can't stop thinking about what you said, about the violence in my game." I said I respected it. "No, you said it was messy." She turned to me, the lantern light reflecting in her eyes like gold coins. "You know why I play like that? Why I learned to take the ball so early it feels like I'm falling forward?" I shook my head, unable to speak. The air between us was thick, charged with enough voltage to restart the grid. "Because of you," she confessed. The words hung there, heavy and undeniable. "Junior Nationals, 12 years ago. You hit a forehand that nearly took my head off. I realized then that if I gave you time, you would destroy me. So I built my entire game, my entire life, around taking your time away. Every sprint, every 5 a.m. wake up, every missed birthday and ruined relationship, it was all just to be half a second faster than you." My chest tightened. It was a confession of obsession that mirrored my own so perfectly it hurt. It stripped away the last layer of professional distance. "You think you're the only one?" I whispered, shifting on the bed, the springs groaning beneath the noise of the wind. "Sophia, I didn't learn to hit with that heavy spin to win trophies. I learned it because it was the only thing that could push you back behind the baseline. You were the ghost in every practice session. When I was lifting until my arms shook, I wasn't thinking about the podium. I was thinking about your backhand down the line. I pushed my body to the breaking point because I knew you were somewhere doing the same." We stared at each other across the small pool of yellow light. The rivalry that had defined us, that had fueled a decade of animosity, suddenly looked different. It wasn't hatred. It never had been. It was a profound, consuming acknowledgement. We had carved each other out of raw effort. I was who I was because she existed, We're sick, she said softly, a dry, humorless laugh escaping her lips. We're actually obsessed. We're champions, I corrected, leaning forward. The distance between us on the bed had vanished without me realizing it. It takes a monster to catch a monster. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the roar of the wind and the deafening sound of my own pulse. The history between us, the net exchanges, the press conference barbs, the cold shoulders, felt like it was dissolving, revealing the heated core that had been driving it all along. She wasn't my enemy. She was the only person on earth who understood the language I spoke. And looking at her now, with the storm locking us in and the rest of the world erased, I realized that the adrenaline I felt when I saw her draw wasn't fear. It was want. "Sam," she breathed, her gaze dropping to my mouth, then snapping back up to my eyes, wide with panic and inevitability. "The way you look at me right now, it's not how you look at a doubles partner." "No," I admitted, the truth tearing its way out of my throat. "It's not." The air crackled. The storm outside was violent, but the energy arcing between us was lethal. One move. That was all it would take, one shift of weight, and the 10-year war would end in a collision that had nothing to do with tennis. "You say it's not a doubles partner look?" she challenged, her voice dropping to that low, dangerous register she used when disputing a line call with an umpire. She didn't back away. She leaned in, invading the scant inches of neutral ground left on the mattress. "Then prove it. Stop analyzing the data and actually play the point." Her words were a direct strike, aimed at the hesitation she knew was my fatal flaw. I had spent 10 years analyzing her, predicting her, trying to counter her, but I had never just reacted to her. The intellectual shield I used to keep her at a distance, the stats, the game tape, the snark, suddenly felt flimsy, useless against the raw heat radiating from her skin. The lantern light flickered, casting her face in sharp relief, and I saw the tremor in her hand where it rested on the quilt. She was terrified. She was waiting for me to retreat, to make a joke, to reestablish the safety of the baseline. I didn't. I reached out, my hand moving before my brain could calculate the risk, and wrapped my fingers around her wrist. Her pulse hammered against my palm, erratic and fast, a frantic rhythm that matched my own. "Be careful, Sophia," I whispered, the warning sounding more like a plea. "We can't uncross this line. Uncross." "I'm sick of lines," she breathed. "Cross it." The space between us vanished. It wasn't a gentle drift, it was a collision. I pulled her toward me, and she didn't just yield, she crashed against me. Her mouth found mine with the same violent precision as her backhand. Urgent, demanding, and absolutely devastating. It wasn't soft. There was nothing soft about us. It was teeth and breath and the desperate, starving release of a decade's worth of suppressed adrenaline. The kiss tasted of ozone and the peppermint tea we'd shared hours ago, but mostly it tasted like her. A flavor I realized I had been craving since I was 16 years old. We tangled together, a chaotic knot of limbs on the narrow bed. The quilt was kicked away, irrelevant against the furnace heat we were generating. My hands found the familiar topography of her shoulders, but instead of analyzing the muscle tension for weakness, I was mapping it for grip. I felt the ridge of the scar on her clavicle from her surgery 3 years ago. A tactile history I knew from press releases, but had never touched. It felt sacred. She made a sound, a low, broken noise in her throat, when my thumb grazed the sensitive skin of her neck. It was the sound of a wall coming down. The Ice Queen, dissolved under my hands, replaced by a woman who was fiercely, beautifully responsive. Her hands were everywhere, urgent and skilled. She gripped my waist, her fingers digging into the obliques she knew were my center of gravity. It was terrifying how well she knew my body. She knew exactly where I held tension, exactly how to leverage her weight against mine to pin me down, to open me up. The rivalry didn't disappear, it transmuted. The aggression we used to destroy each other on the court was poured into the friction of skin on skin. It was a competition of who could get closer, who could feel more. I ran my hands down the strong, solid line of her spine, marveling at the power she held in reserve. This wasn't the fragile intimacy of strangers discovering each other. This was the confident, heavy collision of two forces that had been orbiting each other for a lifetime. But then, the sheer intensity of it threatened to buckle me. The sensory overload, the smell of her hair, the rough friction of the sheets, the overwhelming reality that this was Sophia, made my head spin. I pulled back just an inch, gasping for air, my mind reeling. I hesitated, my focus fracturing under the weight of the sensation. I was faltering, the way I sometimes did on match point, when the magnitude of the wind became too real. Sophia saw the waver. She felt my rhythm break. Her hands tightened on my biceps, anchoring me to the mattress, anchoring me to her. Her eyes snapped open, dark and dilated, locking onto mine with a fierce, unyielding intensity. "Don't you dare bail out now," she commanded, her voice rough, stripped of all pretense. She shifted, pressing her forehead against mine, forcing me to breathe her air. "Stay in it. Focus on the finish, Sam." The phrase, the coaching cue we'd heard 1,000 times, the mantra of endurance, cut through the haze like a knife. It wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was an instruction. She was coaching me through the panic of the pleasure, demanding I stay present for the outcome. "Focus on the finish," I repeated, the words grounding me. "Good," she whispered, her lips brushing against my ear, sending a shiver straight to my core. "Now finish it." I stopped thinking. I stopped analyzing. I let the instinct take over, the muscle memory of desire finally allowed to run the play. I pulled her back down to me, and the storm outside ceased to exist. There was only the rhythm of our breath, the heat of her skin, and the absolute undeniable truth of us. When the quiet finally returned, it was heavy and sweet. The wind had died down, leaving only the soft, rhythmic dripping of rain from the eaves. We lay entangled, limbs heavy and loose, the frantic energy spent, replaced by a profound, settling calm. The darkness of the cabin felt different now. Not empty, but full. We lay there in the cooling air, the silence no longer a weapon, but a blanket. I listened to her heart slow down against my chest, matching my own beat for beat, and realized that for the first time in 10 years, the competition was over. We had both won. Light hit my eyelids first, not the harsh strobe of lightning, but the pale, unforgiving gray of a mountain dawn. I didn't move immediately. I couldn't. My left arm was pinned under a solid weight, and there was a rhythmic warmth against my chest that definitely wasn't a pillow. Sophia. She was asleep, face buried in the crook of my neck, one leg thrown over mine in a claim of ownership that persisted even in unconsciousness. The storm had passed, leaving the cabin in a stunned, suspended silence. I lay there, waiting for the panic, the regret, the "oh God, I slept with the enemy" spiral that usually follows a lapse in judgment. It didn't come. Instead, a strange, crystalline clarity settled over me. This wasn't a mistake. It was an inevitability. Like a tie-break set that finally resolved, the tension that had knotted my stomach for a decade was gone, replaced by a hum of satisfaction. I shifted slightly, and Sophia stirred. She didn't jump or scramble away to the edge. She just tightened her grip, inhaling deeply against my skin. "If you're checking your watch," she mumbled, voice raspy with sleep. "Don't. We have 20 minutes before the alarm." "I wasn't checking the time," I whispered, I was checking if my arm had fallen off from lack of circulation. She pulled back then, propping herself up on one elbow. Her hair was a disaster, a wild halo that defied every sleek press photo ever taken of her. She looked at me, eyes clear and unblinking. There was no awkwardness, no shyness, just the same direct assessment she gave a short ball. "Okay," she said, the word landing flat and sure. "So, that happened." "It did? Does this change the mission?" she asked. It was the only question that mattered. We were here for gold. We were here to win. If this softened us, if this made us hesitate at the net, we'd have to kill it right here. I reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I still want the gold, Sophia, maybe more than before." "Good," she nodded, leaning into my touch briefly before rolling away to sit on the edge of the bed. Her back was to me, the line of her spine familiar now in a way that made my throat tight. "Because if you start going easy on me in drills, I will dump you. Professionally and whatever this is." "I'm not going to go easy on you," I scoffed, sitting up and stretching. The soreness in my muscles felt different today. Earned. "I'm going to make you work for every single point, but I might let you buy me dinner after we win." "You're paying?" She shot back over her shoulder, standing up and stretching her arms overhead. The morning light caught the definition of her lats, and I allowed myself a moment to just look, to appreciate the power without the jealousy. "I'm the one with the higher ranking. For now," I muttered, but I was smiling. The routine of the morning was identical to the day before, yet entirely reinvented. We navigated the tiny space without the defensive geometry. When I brushed past her to get to the coffee maker, she didn't flinch. She leaned back slightly into the contact. We brushed teeth side by side at the tiny sink, elbows bumping, eyes meeting in the mirror not to challenge, but to share a private joke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was companionable. She made coffee, black, strong, terrible, and handed me a mug. "Drink up. Coach is going to run us into the ground today." "Let him try," I said, taking a sip and grimacing at the bitterness. It tasted perfect. We packed our bags with efficient precision, grips checked, water bottles filled. The secret of what happened in the dark stayed in the room, folded into the unmade sheets and the cooling embers of the fire. As we stepped out onto the gravel path, the cold mountain air hitting our faces, I looked at her. She zipped her jacket, caught my eye, and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Ready?" she asked. "Always," I replied. We walked toward the courts, not as rivals, but as a unit. The distance between us was gone, replaced by a terrifying, beautiful strength. The final training session was a massacre, but in the best way possible. We were up against the top men's collegiate pair in the region, big servers, heavy hitters, guys who usually overpowered us with sheer physics. But today, the physics didn't matter because the geometry had changed. We weren't two singles players patrolling half a court anymore. We were a hive mind. When the server tossed the ball, I didn't need to look at Sophia to know she was poaching. I felt it. I felt the shift in her weight before her shoes even squeaked. I moved left to cover the alley instantly, the rotation seamless, like gears clicking into place. The return came screaming down the line, right where I knew it would be. I blocked it back low, forcing the volley up, and Sophia was there to bury it. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. The friction that used to waste our energy, the hesitation, the second guessing, the need to prove who was alpha was gone. In its place was a terrifying efficiency. We moved like water. If I was the wave crashing down, she was the undertow pulling them in. It was like we were tethered by an invisible elastic cord. When she surged forward, I dropped back. When I pulled wide, she filled the center. No calls, no frantic shouting of mine or yours, just a silent, predatory understanding. Coach watched from the high chair. his whistle dangling uselessly around his neck. He looked baffled. After a point where we switched sides 3 times in 6 shots without saying a word, ending with Sophia hitting an overhead smash off a lob I'd baited, he shook his head. "Finally!" he yelled over the wind. "You two are finally listening to me. That's what cohesion looks like." I caught Sophia's eye as we walked back to the service line. She wiped sweat from her forehead with her wristband, hiding a smirk. We weren't listening to him, we were listening to each other. The intimacy of the night before hadn't made us soft, it had stripped away the noise. I knew her rhythm now. I knew the exact cadence of her breathing when she was about to explode into a sprint. I knew that when she clenched her jaw, she was going down the line, not cross court. We swept the set 6-1. As we sat on the bench, towels draped over our heads to block out the high-altitude sun, our knees brushed. Just a touch. On the outside, we looked like exhausted teammates refueling. But under the towel, the contact was electric. A live wire running straight to the source of our new power. "They have no idea," she murmured, taking a drink of water, her eyes scanning the court, but her focus entirely on the heat of my leg against hers. "Let's keep it that way," I replied. "Let them think it's just good coaching." The fear that desire would dull our edge was gone. If anything, the secret sharpened it. Every point we won felt like something we were stealing together, a private victory stacked on top of the public one. We weren't just playing for the flag anymore, we were playing for the cabin, for the storm, for the silence. Packing up that afternoon felt heavy. We stripped the sheets from the bed, erasing the evidence of the territory we'd claimed. The cabin returned to being just a room. Wood, dust, and silence. But as we walked to the transport van, gear bags slung over shoulders, the air between us wasn't empty. It was pressurized. We were leaving the sanctuary, heading back to the cameras, the press, the noise of the Olympic Village. But we were bringing the dynamic with us. The roar of the Olympic Stadium is deafening. 20,000 people screaming for a point. But standing at the service line, looking at the back of Sophia's head, the noise fades to a hum. She turns, catching my gaze, and taps her racket against her shoe. A signal. I'm with you. We aren't just rivals or partners anymore. We're something lethal. If you want to see where this partnership goes next, hit subscribe. The game is just starting.